Around the 412. We are part of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Tyler, and with me as always is my co-host Smitty. What's going on, man? It's an exciting time to be a Pittsburgh sports fan. We got the NFL draft coming up. Pirates are 500 on the season so far, and the Penguins are rolling into the playoffs soon. It's an exciting time. How you feeling?
Everything that you just said is everything that we're going to talk about in this show. So yeah, this is a great week. One of my favorite weeks, honestly, is draft week. By the time that you're listening to this or watching this, it could be tonight that we're doing a live mock draft on our own separate YouTube channel around the 412 with some of our friends from the draft community. So go and check that out if you hadn't already, or if you're watching or listening to this in time to catch it live. But yeah, this is one of my favorite weeks of the year. We're also going to be doing a live show during the draft on Thursday. So we're going to go live at probably when the draft starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, since we know the first pick won't be made till like 8:30 anyway.
Yeah, I think this is an underrated time of year, sports-wise, because to me, I've always said October is the best month of the year for me for sports, because you got NHL starting, NBA starting, MLB's in the postseason, and then college and NFL football are like midway through the seasons. This time's underrated too. You got NBA in the postseason. Normally NHL's in the postseason already, but we're getting there a little bit later, but still we're going towards it. NFL draft, baseball starting. I think this is a really good time for all sports fans.
So with the NFL draft being this week, I think that we got one thing really to talk about with the Steelers. I don't want it to be a regurgitated discussion of last week with where they're going to go with pick number 20, should they stay there. But my pick was Daxton Hill. And now listen, they could still go that direction, but it wouldn't be my top choice of where they could go. With the Steelers re-signing Terrell Edmunds to a one-year deal for just $2.5 million, by the way, which is a steal of a contract. I don't care what you think about the player, even if you think he's average, okay, which I think that's a relatively fair assessment. I like him a lot. I think he complements Micah Fitzpatrick well. I'm not here to debate that. But either way, $2.5 million for a starting strong safety who has started 60 games over 4 years. That's a steal of a contract. They save $4 million basically by not picking up the fifth-year option on him. So for me, now this in a sense is going to change my pick and could change their draft plans, but I think that they still could take a safety at some point. It's just, for me, I'm not saying Daxton Hill at 20 anymore. I know you already didn't have Daxton Hill. You said Desmond Ridder last week, but does this change, do you think, the Steelers draft plans with Terrell Edmunds being back?
So I think it does. I think that it's not as pressing of a need, because going into the draft, if we didn't have a safety, I would think that they'd probably try to look for one, at least within the first 2 to 3 rounds if they could, and possibly even for the first round, like you said last week. With Terrell Edmunds back, I think the pressure of filling that position goes away. We know who the starting strong safety is going to be alongside Micah Fitzpatrick. And by the way, I just think it's a great move. Like you said, it's basically like picking up the fifth-year option at a cheaper price. And we know what kind of player we're getting already with Terrell Edmunds. It's not just like this new signing that we're going to get, and we have to figure out what they're going to be. We know the kind of player he is. I think it's a great signing. Looking forward to another year with him. But I don't really think this changes too much whether they look at a safety or not in the draft as a whole. I just think it changes how early they're going to look at one. I don't think they're going to be as early as they would have been, like you were saying last week. I think this completely changes that. And I think my viewpoint is it kind of cemented is what I was saying last week, is that I think they're looking quarterback. I still think they're looking quarterback. And with safety out of the way, I think that is the position they are keying on, especially in the first round, whether they stay at 20 or not. I think that's the position they're looking at number one.
Yeah, well, what I will say is, as far as the safety goes, like Daxton Hill, the reason I like him so much is because he can also play in the slot. He could get, like too high safety looks, which Terrell Edmunds isn't really going to give you that. So I think in a sense, like, they still theoretically could add a safety pretty early. And also Terrell Edmunds is only here in a 1-year deal, so they could move on after this season for, a higher ceiling guy, something that, could give you a little bit more if you're looking for a guy with more ball skills or something like that. But yeah, I'm with you. It wouldn't be, like I said, the first route that I would think that they would go. Now, if they don't like a quarterback on the board, it still wouldn't shock me, like say if Kyle Hamilton falls, right? If they decide to go that direction, they could play a bunch of 3 safety looks this year and then move on from Terrell Edmunds after this season. It's just it gives them the luxury of not having to be forced into anything. Like you, however, if someone's asking me right now, I'm now along with you in thinking that if I'm put in a position where somebody says who's going to be the pick at number 20, I'm thinking that Malik Willis doesn't fall to 20. So I'm right there along with you now, where I think Desmond Ridder would probably be my answer.
Yeah. So I guess just to close out this NFL draft talk, because don't worry, folks, we're going to talk about the draft a lot next week. This is just kind of like a preamble to next week's show.
Right. This show, we gave the least attention to the Steelers, knowing that next week they're going to get the bigger portion of the show.
We're going to know all of their picks next week. It's going to be the big chunk of the show next week. But just to close this out, assuming that quarterback is the position that they are keying on, who are some names that you think could possibly slide down that could prevent them from taking a quarterback? Or if this guy is there, they have to take this guy over Desmond Ridder or whoever it may be.
Yeah, well, okay, Kyle Hamilton's the one I just said. I think if he were to fall to 20, and it's starting to sound like that's not totally unrealistic, right? I mean, he's now projected to go like somewhere. He's now projected to go somewhere in like that 11 to 15 range. So, if one team, say there's only Washington at 11 makes the most sense. That's where he's getting mocked a lot. If they don't take him, we could see, a slide all the way down to 20. Like theoretically, you look at these teams, I think that it very well could happen. So I think he's one of those guys. Jordan Davis is another one because defensive tackles fall. He's a guy that people are saying might only be able to play 2 downs. So, and we know how Tomlin has talked about him. I think he's another guy that could definitely make them do it.
I got to say
the other 2 corners, Booth Jr. and Stingley as well, if one of those guys were to fall.
Well, I got to say, I feel like defensive line is not exactly a urgent need for the Steelers, but I feel like it is a sneaky need going into this draft because if you're looking at the depth of the defensive line right now, we don't know the status of Stephon Tuitt still. Tyson Alualu is here on 1 more year deal, and Cam Hayward, as great as he is, he's not getting any younger. So I think
there's a ton of age and availability questions.
Yeah, so you might not be looking at round 1 or even round 2, but I do think at some point in this draft they are going to take another defensive tackle just because it's a sneaky depth need for the team. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that if Stingley Jr. or Booth Jr. are either of them are there, those would be my picks as well. And folks, we're talking about what we think the Steelers would do. Obviously, if Smitty and I are picking, we're not picking a quarterback in the first round. I feel like that's pretty open. But based off what the Steelers would do, that's just kind of the direction.
I will say I do like Malik Willis. So if the board were to fall a certain way, he might be the number 1 player on my board. I just don't think that everybody in front of him would be.
That's what I mean. And I'm saying that quarterback is not our number 1 need, assuming that Malik Willis is already taken as well.
Okay.
I'm just not even counting him as being there. But when it comes to Pickett, Ridder, whoever else it may be, that's not the top position of need.
Right.
But I will say, to close this out, I think if the Seahawks or anyone before them do not take Malik Willis and the Seahawks are picking at number 9, the Steelers are going to trade up at least to 10, if not sooner.
Okay, there it is. There's the projection right there. Hey, listen, we won't have to speculate much longer. The draft is on Thursday night, and we're going to get all our answers then. We'll be able to talk about them on the next show. But until then, we're going to switch gears here and start talking about the Penguins when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. And welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Now we're going to talk about the team that is, we already know is playoff bound for the 16th straight season. The question that we got now about this team, who are they going to play in round 1 of the playoffs? And who do we want them to play in round 1 of the playoffs? A lot of goaltending question marks, as we know. We actually got to look at Louis Domingue. I don't think he played too bad in Sunday afternoon's game, but the team literally, that was one of the most lethargic performances of the season. It seemed like there was nothing. They were doing absolutely nothing offensively. They didn't. I understand like Martin Jones ended up with close to 40 saves, but none of them were like grade A chances. Like there was one that Gensel
none
had
high danger. And I was saying like during the game, maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And they came off a back-to-back, and the Flyers hadn't played since Thursday night. So maybe the energy of the team was lower, but still at the level of competition you were playing against, and literally the level of competition you're playing against, like an AHL squad out there for the most part, I expect a better effort, whether you're on a second night of a back-to-back or not. It was just a really just lethargic effort. Like you were saying, it's just nothing exciting going on at all.
Remember earlier in the year that game against the Senators where they were playing like an AHL team and got blown out? Like I understand that the score of this game wasn't as bad as that one, but it was very similar to me in what we saw on the ice from the Penguins. But anyways, that's not really what we're here to talk about, because yes, the Capitals now actually do have the inside track here to take that 3 seed. The Penguins fall into a wild card, but the last couple games it favors the Penguins with the 2 games they left on the schedule, but I don't want to give them anything based off the fact that, we just lost to Philly and they they got a point from the Maple Leafs, but they lost in a shootout on Sunday afternoon. But so really the possibilities that we're looking at here for the Penguins is facing the Rangers, facing the Hurricanes, or facing the Panthers. That's really what's up in the air right here. Now, we've gotten some really good looks at the Rangers, all very crunched together here towards the end of the season. And we do not want to play Igor Shesterkin in the playoffs, I would assume, because to me, the Rangers are just, they're the kryptonite of what the Penguins have had happen to them in the playoffs recently, right? Like when we got into the bubble in 2020 and that short 5-game series against the Canadiens, the only way that the Canadiens could beat the Penguins was if Carey Price did some goaltending. And when I say that, getting goal lead, I'm talking about exactly what Igor Shesterkin has done to the Penguins this year as well. And it just seems like a similar situation that could happen where Shesterkin we know he's going to steal 2 games in that series right off the bat, pretty much. And can the Penguins still find a way to win 4 out of the other 5? And that's so to me, I don't know where you stand on this, but I'm at the point where I'm like kind of, and they have some goaltending issues, by the way, now too. And I pointed this out on Twitter on Sunday. I'm almost hoping that somehow the Rangers were to leapfrog the Hurricanes, us be at the 3 and play the Hurricanes in the first round.
Yeah, as time's gone on over the past month or so, my teams of who I'd rather play has changed quite a bit. Because originally I still want to play the Rangers first. I thought that, okay, we could still match up against them well, but after seeing the way Shesterkin's played, unless he has a Tristan Jarry effort, like a la 2021 against the Islanders, it's going to be a really tough series. And I think that the Rangers, the style of play that they have, they're just so fast on the Penguins and give them no space to really be creative, which is what the Penguins like to do. And so I think that's really like an Achilles heel of a matchup for them. And so I've adjusted from still wanting to play the Rangers in the first round to those. That's probably the team that I want to play the least out of the options that we have. And I think that I've moved to, I would rather play Carolina, specifically with their goaltending issues as well right now, and Florida over the New York Rangers. And mainly it's just because of Shesterkin, but also throwing in that they just match up well at shutting down what the Penguins like to do.
Yeah, and I think too, like Carolina is very fast, Florida is very fast. That's kind of the name of the game now, is everybody wants to get fast and play with speed. But the Penguins, after the first time playing each of those teams, have actually done a decent job of matching speed against those two, Carolina and Florida. Plus now I don't think that we played either one of those teams since the addition of Ricard Raquel. And also Jason Zucker probably missed those games as well with how much time he missed this year. So I think you're getting a different looking Penguins team against those two, whereas the last few times out against the Rangers, we've seen pretty much, I know Crosby did miss the one, but we've seen a relatively healthy full Penguin squad that we expect to see them go into the playoffs with already play against the Rangers. And I'm just not interested in seeing that happen for a full 7-game series. I don't know if it would get to 7 games, to be honest with you. So I've moved on to, I would say, Carolina, Florida, and then New York. But now looking at it, so I was looking Sunday afternoon, right? And Carolina, Antti Ranta gets hurt in that game. And it's tied at 2 at that point against the Islanders. And I'm thinking, okay, like the Islanders very well could win this game. And then all of a sudden the Rangers, even after losing to Boston in regulation the night before, they still could take over that top spot. But now they're 4 points back. The Rangers they do have a game in hand. So if they were to win that game in hand, you're only looking at 2 points back, but the clock's ticking, time's running out. It very much looks like It's going to be the Rangers as it's going to be Carolina, New York, potentially Washington, and then Pittsburgh in the wild card. And then we're looking at Florida.
Yeah, that's another thing that we're not talking about is, do we want Washington to pass us? Because everybody wants the Penguins to be winning these games.
I'll tell you what, if it was the way it should be, where it's 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3, then probably yeah.
Yeah, but even the way that it's at right now, because the Penguins would be fighting with, if they drop to a wild card, they'd be fighting with the Bruins for who is the first or second wild card. If you can get it to where you play either Carolina or Florida, I mean, if you're a wild card in that scenario, if the Rangers stay where they're at, that might be a better scenario for the Penguins, because no matter what, you're not having home ice. So who really cares? You should try to play for who you want to play in the playoffs, and obviously the team is not going to say that, and they're going to want to win as many games as possible. But as a fan base, I feel like it might be the smarter move to honestly let Washington pass you, because playing Carolina or the Florida might be easier than New York. I think that the goalie troubles that Carolina is going through could affect them in the playoffs. You need really good goaltending in the playoffs. Ranta got hurt. Anderson's out for at least a week, but do we know what is wrong with him? Playoff time, would he come back? So there's question marks on their goaltending there, but with Florida, they don't really have injuries with the goalie. But I'm just looking at Sergei Bobrovsky is their number one goalie, and the Penguins in recent years have owned Sergei Bobrovsky. And I don't care how good the team is in front of Bob. I just am looking at the past history of the Penguins against that guy in big situations, and he seems to crumble under the light. And I think that might help the Penguins if they're playing a goalie that they're familiar against. And they have pretty much dominated for the most part. Maybe not since he's joined Florida, but at least in the playoff situations, whenever he was in Columbus, they really smoked him up.
Yeah, and then if that's the case and they turn to their other guy, it's a first round pick, but unproven in the playoffs really to this point, Spencer Knight, who by the way just got lit up on Sunday afternoon by Tampa Bay. I don't know. It's an interesting argument. I'm curious to see what the people think, if they have a preference of who they want to play, or they're just, hey, the Penguins are in the playoffs, you got to play the best, or you got to beat the best anyway, so might as well play them whenever. I don't think that there's a wrong answer here necessarily. I think it's just an opinion. But for me, I have a feeling I do not want to get goalied in the playoffs again by Igor Shesterkin. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I just have this. I'm looking into the future right now and seeing a very similar playoff result as to what we've seen with the Penguins in the past. And it comes down to the goaltending.
I can already imagine. And no matter who they played, whether it's New York, Florida, or Carolina, they could get first rounded again. And that doesn't mean that the Penguins would put up a bad effort. These are just really good teams too, but I cannot imagine what Twitter,
the Eastern
Facebook,
Conference is crazy.
The Eastern Conference is crazy good, but that is not going to matter one bit to a lot of Penguins fans if they lose in the first round again. They're going to be calling for Mike Sullivan to be replaced. They're going to be calling for Hextall and Burkle to go. They're going to be saying that Gino should be traded or I guess not re-signed because he's a free agent after this year. And same thing, Letang should go. There's going to be a bunch of people that are just going to be losing their minds no matter who they lose to, when they lose, but especially if it's going to be in the first round again, even though this year, I really have a hard time. It really just depends on how they're playing. If they play a really gritty series, a hard-fought series, but they lose in the first round, that's okay because the Eastern Conference is just that good this year. But if they get an effort like they did in 2020 against the Montreal Canadiens, then there I can see some complaints. But either way, it's just going to be hard for me to complain a lot because of how good the Eastern Conference is.
Right. Yeah. And, I will say what's nice is outside of Tristan Jarry right now, the Penguins, they got everybody that you could ask to have on the roster playing right now. With Gino coming back the last couple games, we've seen a different player stretched in each of those two. Kasperi Kapanen was most recently stretched on Sunday. Brian Boyle was stretched the previous game on Saturday. I don't know if that was just a matchup thing, knowing that Pittsburgh Philly rivalry, they wanted to go a little bit heavier, so Brian Boyle plays, or is that kind of what we were talking about where Kasperi Kapanen looked like he could be the odd man out when Gino comes back? So I guess I'll pose that question to you and the people in the comments as well. Is it Brian Boyle or Kasperi Kapanen that's going to be sitting in the press box come playoff time?
I think it will be Kasperi Kapanen. And reason being is that he just has not brought anything to the team like recently. He had improved for a little bit, at least visually. He was passing the eye test more and more.
Yeah, him and Carter had a little something going there very briefly.
Yeah, but it just didn't sustain, and it's just kind of more of the same that we brought up all season long. And I think Boyle has kind of proven that he should be on that fourth line. And I think that maybe it's a little bit overrated, but I think having a veteran presence who's been there and done that for maybe some players that haven't really been in the playoffs too much or like first rounded multiple times. I think that might be good for the locker room in the playoffs as well. I think he does bring some quality play. Maybe he doesn't have the legs like some of the other players or like Kapanen, for example, that we would have liked. But I do think that he still brings some quality hockey to that fourth line. And I think he's proven over the season. I mean, who would have thought on a tryout contract we'd be talking like Brian Boyle getting double-digit goals on the fourth line for the Penguins. Whether he plays center or wing, I don't really think it matters that much. I just think that he is the guy that's earned the spot to be in whenever the playoff starts.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was going to say a lot of the same things. You mentioned the flexibility to play him at wing or center, but also I think you're talking about a fourth-line role here and which player, matches into that role more. And it's Brian Boyle way over Kasperi Kapanen. Like, I guess what I'm getting at here is if he's not playing your top six, I don't see a role for Kasperi Kapanen. And there's absolutely no way he deserves to be in the top six because there's just no way to fit him up there. He hasn't warranted that. So, yeah, to me, it's Brian Boyle because he fits the role that you're talking about filling.
Kapanen has gotten a little bit of the Connor Sherry or the Dominic Simone syndrome where and we don't get me wrong, like you and I love Dominic Simone as the hockey player, but like it's kind of like in those scenarios where, especially with Connor Sherry, I feel like where if he wasn't in your top six, he doesn't really add a lot of value as a winger in your bottom six. So should he be in there anyway?
Yeah, like he's not going to play in a checking role. He's not going to be on like a shutdown unit playing against a team's top pairing, or I'm sorry, a top line. Like it's just, he doesn't bring that element to his game. He's an off the rush player who relies on pucks going in the back of the net, and he has not done that at a high enough rate this year to warrant putting him up in the top six. And I also don't know that you have that type of player to slide down from the top six, to make it work. So I don't know. I don't think that there's a role for him right now. And, it's going to take an injury to somebody in the top six probably to make that happen. And definitely don't want to see that. So, no. To me, it's Kasperi Kapanen in the press box to start the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's crazy how much that has changed, I feel like, over the past month. Because we debated whether it's going to be Kapanen out, whether it's going to be Boyle out, Heinen, Rodriguez. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's been multiple names that's been brought up, and it's looking more and more like it's going to end up being Kapanen. But I just a week ago, we were probably saying it was going to be Rodriguez or Kapanen. And then 2 weeks ago, I think you mentioned it was going to be Heinen, and then he had that.
Yeah, Heinen he was in the doghouse, and then he scored in 4 out of 5 games. So
yeah, and I think that just shows like how underwhelming the bottom six for the Penguins has been for the past few months. They just haven't really had a lot going on. It's picked up a little bit more recently, which is nice to see. I'd still like to see some more consistency, especially going into the playoffs, but I think we've kind of figured out who our lineup is going to be. I think we saw that today. I don't really think there's going to be much changing, and Kapanen, for better or for worse, is going to be the odd man out.
Yeah. I have nothing else to add to it because we completely agree there. So somehow, some way, we are once again about to talk about the Pirates while they're a 500 baseball team. So that should be exciting. When we come back, we're going to do just that. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. And welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty. That is Tyler. Yeah, that wasn't a mishap. You heard me right. Your audio's not messed up. The Pittsburgh Pirates are still 500. They did it. Even though they lost 21-0 in a game over the weekend, they took 3 out of 4 at Wrigley Field, won the series, and are back to 500 again. David Bednar, Dylan Peters, Will Crow. This bullpen looks like a reincarnation of the 2013 to 15 Pittsburgh Pirates right now. I mean, is that where we should start? Do we just want to start out talking about how good this bullpen is? Because even when he gets in a situation like he did on Sunday afternoon, David Bednar can just throw it by you pretty much whenever he wants with what Roberto Perez said is the best fastball he's ever seen.
Yeah, we could start there. First, I got to say, the reason baseball is so great is that you can outscore your opponent over a 4-game span 29-12, and you still lose 3 out of the 4 games.
Yep.
It's really remarkable. And the Pirates, last week when we recorded, they were 1 game above 500. They dropped down to 500, but, I mean, I'll keep it. I mean, they're 16 games into the season, about a 1/10 into the season, and still 500. I'll take it. But yeah, this bullpen has really been amazing. Will Crow, David Bednar, they haven't even given up a run yet. And looking at the situations you can put these guys in and what they are able to get out of. I mean, Will Crow earlier in this game on Sunday had runners on second and third, and with 1 out, or second and first, or second and third.
No, it was second, third with 1 out. Yeah.
Yeah. Was able to get out of it. And then the whole situation at the end of the game with David Bednar able to clutch up, get Contreras out, how do you say that dude's last name?
Who was
the
it?
dude he struck out at the end of the game. I don't even
Schwindel?
remember.
Wisdom?
Schwindel,
I don't know which. Okay.
Schwindel. It was the one that ended the game.
I couldn't even remember who it was.
Putting these guys in high pressure situations, they've delivered. This bullpen is amazing. It's a real shame that the starting pitching can't pick up some of the slack. But my question is this bullpen going to be members for the future that stick around, or are we just like kind of gaining some like trade chips from this bullpen?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, because I thought you were going to say, can they sustain this over the course of a season? Because I think that they can be this effective, but I don't think that you can tax them this much. You're going to need more from your starting pitching. And, I look at a guy like a move that they just made, like I wanted to bring up, we might as well like kind of transition the conversation a little bit, or at least, add it to this, is Roansy Contreras getting sent back down. I think that they could have continued to stretch him out in the major leagues and then eventually just put him into the rotation. So I have no problem with him gaining starts. And if that's what he's going down the AAA to do, like whatever, so be it. I know what they're doing by doing this. I would have liked to have seen him just continue to do what he was doing at the majors, because he was a huge piece. We could have been talking about him in the same segment right now, talking about how good the bullpen's been, because he's been a part of that so far. But to answer your question, I think give and take. I think there's some guys that they could, like, say Chris Stratton continues to be pretty good in his role. I could see them moving on from a guy like him. I don't think that they would have to be overwhelmed, in my opinion, to move like a Bednar, especially like with what they're seeing from Will Crow right now. Like, I don't think that they want to give up on that immediately after bringing that out of him. And same thing with like a Dylan Peters. Like, he's a guy that you pretty much that you got for nothing coming over from, was it Seattle or the Angels? One of those two. He's pitched for both of them. But, I don't think that guys that like in that situation where they feel like they're getting closer to this window of contention, that they're ready to give up on yet. I think that's going to be determined by, do they continue to see like the same types of things that we've seen to start this year happening? Like, are they still kind of around, even if they're not a good baseball team at the deadline?
Yeah.
What type of signs are they seeing? Like, when O'Neal Cruz comes up too as well, and these other things. Like, I really can't say right now if I do think that they're part of the future, because we've talked about this before. Like, what good do really good relievers bring to a team that's not good? Those are the assets that you do trade off, that bad baseball teams do trade off. Every team that's in contention needs relievers, and every team that's not in contention has relievers to trade to those teams.
Yeah. And I think that it's just puzzling to me, because I don't know when. There's always going to be that transition period where you stop trading your assets and you're going to retain them because you're going to be in contention. I guess it's, when do the Pirates feel like that's necessary? Yeah. They've just been so good, but I'm with you. The starting pitching needs to give these guys some relief. You need to stop getting into your bullpen in the 4th and 5th inning, and hopefully start to stretch some of these starters out and get them into like the 6th, 7th inning, because it's going to be really taxing on these guys. And if you want to keep up this effort that a lot of them are putting up, I mean, like I said, Will Crow and David Bednar have not given up runs yet. You're going to need to really help them out and get the starting pitching to give some lengthening starts. I feel like we've seen a couple good starts from a few guys. I thought Mitch Keller had a really good start this week, but then you get a guy like JT Brubaker. I feel like he's just been disappointing. And the job that, oh my gosh, the game on Saturday, the 21-0 game, that was just not good all around, even though I think that it was Thomas pitching, right?
Zach Thompson.
Or Thompson. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
But I think out of his 9 runs allowed, only 4 of them were earned. But still, getting that many guys on base as a team is kind of concerning. But yeah, they really need to really clean up the starting pitching a lot. But bullpen been amazing. I feel like that's kind of been the story for the Pirates for a long time. We've had some amazing bullpens and some lackluster starting pitching to go with those bullpens.
Well, that was even the thing with Huntington, right? Is he could always build a bullpen, and that's why they were so okay with trading relievers off when they would, because you knew that Huntington could find arms for it. But yeah, I think you look at this and like it's funny because I was just looking at the relievers. Dylan Peters has 3 wins on the year already for them as a reliever, and his whip is 0.48. Crow's is 0.83. Bednar's is 0.88. Like those 3 alone anchoring the bullpen, they're in a good spot. Like even Heath Hembree's been pretty solid in his role. I mentioned Chris Stratton, who we've seen Shelton be okay with being the closer, closing out the game in the 9th inning if there's a higher leverage situation in the 7th or 8th that he wants to use Bednar in. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still not like a huge fan of Derek Shelton, right? And I still would say that he's not going to be the manager like when this team is in its window of contention. But I think that he's taking steps more towards what I've been advocating for.
Yeah, no, getting rid of the traditional closer is great. I think that putting your best pitchers in the more high danger situations is the smart thing to do. I don't know why baseball hasn't really transitioned to that as a whole, and why the closer position just really hasn't died off already, because say you're facing a team and you're at the top of the order, but it's the 8th inning instead of the 9th inning. Why would you not put your best pitcher out there? It doesn't make sense, but we've started to see that. I agree. I think that's some transitioning that has been done really well so far this season. I hope it continues. And I just hope like winning baseball continues. It's great to see them take 3 out of the 4 against the Cubs. And like the NL Central is like really bad. I feel like in general. So we don't know how long they can stay floating around 500, or whether they'll be quote unquote in it at the deadline or whatever it may come. But I think that because of the division that they're in, it's going to make for some really fun baseball this year. And I think that continues to go with what we were saying last week. Like this team might not be great. We know they're not, honestly, but they're still some fun to watch. They're putting up some fun games. They're putting up some at least competitive games so far. And I think it's been entertaining.
The last thing I want to bring up is we saw Anthony Alford get DFA'd like 2 games after coming back up from his rehab stint.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've been advocating for, but it's weird timing just because like they finally actually had like a third outfielder to play on the, even though they could play Reynolds, Gamble, and Marisnik, but we've rarely seen those 3 out there together. We've seen some type of like either Cole Tucker, Diego Castillo, Hoy Park out there, but they finally get Alford back up here, and then they DFA him the first time that they need like an arm for the bullpen. So it's a weird timing of the move. Not that I disagree with it, but what a shame. You know, this was Ben Sherrington's guy going back to his days in Toronto. And again, like I can't stress this enough, he looked the part. If you ever watch this guy like take batting practice, or just again like the way that he looks, you would think like, oh wow, this is definitely a Major League Baseball player. He looks like he should be a good baseball player, and it's never clicked for him. He's never been able to put it all together. We've seen it in very short stints, like the way that he wrapped up his 2021 campaign, but obviously full body of work, it wasn't there, and it was time to cut ties. It's just, again, what's with the timing of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing against the guy. I know I did the little hallelujah, but it's nothing against him personally. It's just he did not perform for the Pirates, so why was he here? We're not going to use you if you're batting 180. I don't care how good your defense is.
Striking out like 80% of the time.
Yeah. And wasn't he the move to send whenever Contreras went down? He was being the one that was being. No,
he got DFA'd for Bo Salser today.
No. Whenever Ronzi Contreras was sent down, Anthony Alford was the person that came back up.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. Mm-hmm.
That was the corresponding move.
I thought you meant
Yeah, I thought that made it a little sting a little bit more that's who they were bringing up when they were sending Contreras back down. It stinks, and it is weird timing. Like, they're playing with a lot of guys that are not traditional outfielders in their outfielder. That's kind of has been the MO for the Pirates for the past like couple seasons that they've done that recently. Hopefully that could change, but yeah,
it probably would already if Travis Swaggerty didn't have the shoulder issues.
Right. And it is odd timing, but especially for how quickly he was brought up and then DFA'd. But I mean, like I said, if you're not going to bring anything to the team, then why are you here? I think he could have been DFA'd a long time ago when he was batting like 160, but it is what it is.
Anyways, if you didn't get your entire Pirates fix this week, you can always head over to the Pirates fan forum and listen to those guys talk about the Pirates.
A lot more than us.
every Friday they come out. DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network as well. If you just listen to the Penguins segment in the last segment, you're like, wow, these guys have no clue what they're talking about. I can tell you who does know what they're talking about is Podcast on Fifth. Where can you find them? Right here in the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. If you listen to our Steelers show or Steelers segment, you weren't feeling that either. Steeler Nation podcast comes out also on Friday, and they know what they're talking about. Stryker knows what he's talking about over there. There's another podcast on the network that I'm not really a fan of, so.
Yeah, we don't have to mention them, but if you are a fan of listening to people not know what they're talking about the NFL draft, like you said, if you're listening to this prior to 9:00 Eastern on Monday when this podcast comes out, we will be doing a live show, live mock draft with our friends Richie, Nate, and Jake, who cover the draft as well. Each of us are assigned teams. We've got all the picks of the first round, and we will be doing it live. We have no idea who anybody is going to pick. And then later in the week, we will be doing a live show on the first night of the draft, starting when the draft starts at 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Yeah. This one, it's not a podcast or anything. It's really chill. It's just a live show where you're just hanging out. We'll have a lot of friends in the draft, or in the show watching the draft with us, hanging out. You can come into the chat, talk to us, ask questions or whatever. There will be some giveaways, I believe. So come check it out. That will also be on our YouTube over at Around the 412, not the DK Pittsburgh Sports YouTube, but subscribe to both.
Yes. Leave us a like, leave us a comment on anything that I brought up through the show. Chime in on the topics. It's the best way for you guys to get involved. Also, all joking aside, Yinzers will be coming out with a new episode tomorrow, I would assume, so you can check them out on here as well. Shout out to Morgan, Sam, and Jordan. Other than that, for Smitty, for Tyler, we love you guys. Can't thank you enough for watching or listening to this show. We'll be right back next week for you guys talking about all the Steelers' newest draft selections. Until then, we'll talk to you guys, and bye-bye.